Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. We have another RDOF default to talk about. This time it's Altice in Louisiana. Be right back. Thanks for joining me, Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So I mentioned that this would be, I think we'd start seeing this because of a few things that have come up recently. First of all, we had a couple of defaults that took place. The FCC named a couple of companies that defaulted, one in Virginia, one in Alabama. And then shortly after that, they announced that they would be taking comments on whether they should allow some companies to relinquish their RDOF. And after that, or maybe about the same time, there were some associations and ISPs that came out and said, hey, we would really like the FCC to allow ISPs to relinquish some of these areas and do that as soon as possible so that we can make sure that these areas are then put back on the map for BEAD. So here's another one. In this case, it was Altice USA. Here you see is the latest RDOF default. And in this case, they sent a letter to the FCC. The FCC did not come out and announce this. The Altice proactively came out and sent a letter to the FCC. So you see here, Altice USA, and this is Intel competitor, has joined a growing list of companies that have told the FCC they will not deploy high-speed broadband to areas for which they won funding in the 2020 RDOF auction. And the growing list at this point, there was a list before the NTIA, before the FCC came out with the latest map, and the NTIA determined how much money each state was going to get from BEAD. There were lots of defaults there, and some big ones. There was Starry, there was Starlink, there was LTD Broadband, the top winner in the auction. So there were some good-sized defaults, but the FCC got all of that figured out and taken care of before the funding was announced for each state, so that those areas could go back into play, so to speak. But then there were two, like I mentioned recently, within the last month. That, the states now that in Alabama and Virginia, the states have to figure out how they're going to cover those areas. And now we have Louisiana. We've got this one from Altice. So it says, again, they're going to be relinquishing 18 census blocks in Louisiana. The rules of the program call for penalties for RDOF awardees that make that choice, but Altice said it reserves and retains its rights to seek relief from any penalties, including waiver of the Commission's rules, as it will seek other relief as may be necessary. And I'm going to look at the letter here in a minute, and it mentions that in there. Altice already deployed service in parts of the area for which it won funding. I don't know if it's talking about Louisiana. It doesn't mention that in the letter, or if it's other areas. They won areas in 3 states, which we'll take a look at here in a minute. Again, the company said in a letter, we'll take a look at that, that it's making the move to ensure that the remaining unserved areas would be eligible to receive funding. Let's see if there's anything else that's not in the letter. The move comes as the FCC seeks to comment on whether to offer a brief amnesty period for providers that would prefer not to deploy service in areas for which they won RDOF funds. Some RDOF awardees say deployment costs have risen dramatically since the funds were won as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, although Altice did not cite that as a reason for returning the funds. That's probably a reason that they are returning the funds, though. The amnesty period would allow providers to surrender RDOF funds for a short time without penalties. Just prior to issuing the public notice saying that it would seek comment on the possibility, the FCC did indeed impose penalties on those 2 providers that opted not to complete their RDOF bids, suggesting that the Commission was not open to amnesty, but then again, they requested comment. So, and then over 30% of the $9.2 billion in RDOF funding was tentatively awarded in 2022, in the 2022 reverse auction, in large part because the FCC rejected several large bidders after the auction was completed. A large bidder that was approved, Starry, told the FCC would not complete its RDOF deployments when the company ran into financial difficulties. Starry provided wireless service and specifically in low-income buildings, those kinds of things, and they expanded very quickly and had financial problems, and they were really hit hard by changes, during the pandemic and after, as far as interest rates and costs to operate those kinds of things. Not everyone in the broadband industry supports the amnesty idea. WTA, Advocates for Rural Broadband, for example, has said that awardees should have considered the possible impact of cost increases when they made their bids. Well, things have been fairly financially stable, and prior to the pandemic and supply chain shortages and other things that would have caused inflation in the last few years. So it would be hard to foresee that. And if you did foresee that, if you were the company, let's say some of the companies said, okay, you know what, we're gonna build in a nice big buffer for inflation here, they would not have won. They would have been taking themselves out of the auction. So unless every company had done that, that would not have worked. So I think that's not a fair statement or a fair position there. So let's take a look at the letter real quick. So again, this is from Altice USA. And this is, again, they bid through their affiliate Cebridge Telecom, LA, and that's for Louisiana there. And I'll take a look at the other states here in a minute. They were awarded RDOF funding to deploy, and this is interesting, 100 by 20 service to 18 census blocks groups in Louisiana. Through this letter, Altice notifies the FCC of its plans to surrender those areas. Altice is committing to closing the digital divide and delivering high-speed broadband to rural communities, including through expansion of its broadband network in Louisiana, and has begun connecting unserved locations in its RDOF areas. So they've begun the process, but it sounds like they're not going to finish it. So there may be some locations that actually will be served, but they're going to have to, they can't pick some locations and default. I think they've got to default on an entire census block group maybe, or census block, I'm not sure. Probably a census block group, CBG. Altice is ensuring that remaining unserved areas are eligible to receive federal funding to support symmetrical gig speeds through programs like the BEAD program. And it's interesting because they say symmetrical gig speeds. They are one of the few that did not bid in RDOF at gig speeds. Most people bid at the highest level at gig speeds. They bid at what was not the highest level. And if you look at this here, you'll see these were the performance tiers under RDOF. So you had your minimum. So these were still things that were available when RDOF auction was going on. As somebody could bid the minimum at a 25 by 3 with, and you see your usage tiers here, and then you had baseline 50 by 5. Then you had above baseline 100 by 20. That's where Altice had bid. Then you had gigabit. Most people bid here. A few bid here. I don't think anybody did minimum or baseline. So it wasn't like some people were bidding 25 by 3 or 50 by 5. And these weights here would determine, these would weigh down basically your bid. So if you bid at the minimum, you were starting out at a disadvantage. You had a 50 weight. If you bid the baseline 35, and for somebody like Altice that bid the 100 by 20 at the above baseline, they had a weighting on their bid of 20. If you bid at the gigabit level, you had no weight. So in the early rounds of the bidding, you'd be okay in some of these other categories, but as the bids went on and the weights started to, as the percentages came down and the weights started to take more of an impact, then you would have an issue here and the gigabit would tend to win out. And then you see here you had different latency. I think everybody bid at the low latency, including Altice, where 100 milliseconds or less round trip would be low latency, and that's not hard to achieve. Even satellite really can achieve that. So anyway, this is where they were, but most people again were in that gigabit tier. So let's see. So again, they're saying this would open it up for gigabit broadband in some areas. Let's see. Altice understands that it will no longer be entitled to receive further RDOF support for the surrendered CBGs, and that it may be likely to be to the applicable non-compliance rules, may be subject to the applicable non-compliance rules. So yeah, they're saying we understand there may be fines and kinds and things involved. It says Altice reserves and retains its rights to seek relief from any penalties, including waiver of the Commission's rules, as well as seek other relief that as may be necessary. So part of what they're saying there is, hey, we're trying to be good guys here. We're trying to make it so that with the BEAD funding, it says here, indeed, Louisiana is in the process of finalizing its BEAD eligibility map, and removing these CBGs as federally funded will permit them to receive even higher speeds, assuming that somebody wants to bid higher speeds there. Maybe it's difficult just in general in those areas for Altice to get even speeds of 100 by 20. But if you're going to do 100 by 20, unless they're going to be doing something like fixed wireless there, they've probably got, if they have any infrastructure there now, it's probably DSL, or there may be DSL service there, but they can't do DSL. They're not a cable operator. They're not going to be able to deploy that. So they'd probably have to do fixed wireless. That may not be a strength of theirs. So if you're going to do 100 by 20 in general, a lot of the people that would be doing gigabit, if you're going to put fiber in 100 by 20, that's not a problem. 100 by 100 is not a problem. A gig symmetrical is not a problem. So it's the 100 by 20. They were probably looking at some other technology. I don't know what it would be, or maybe they were looking at fiber and thinking we'll just bid at 100 by 20 and we'll have no problem getting that. But if they could do 100 by 20 with fiber, they could do a gig by fiber. So I'm not sure what they were planning on doing in these areas. Again, it may be that they were planning on doing fixed wireless, but they're not going to be doing that. So again, I think what they're saying here, as far as they're going to be looking for other potential relief, that could mean if the FCC does come out and say, hey, we will go ahead and allow some people to relinquish some of their areas, and Altice has already done it, maybe they then would say, hey, we did this early to give the state of Louisiana plenty of time. Could you please add us to this program? Or, hey, we did this again to try to be helpful, even though we didn't want to wait for the FCC to see if you made a decision. So we're trying to be helpful so that we could get these areas in the map. So please be kind to us. It could be that. They did it proactively as opposed to waiting and not getting it done later and then seeing what happens. So maybe that's where they're going there. So if we look at the, this is kind of small, but you can see here, this is from that particular auction that took place where they won, and you can see the various companies that won, and then you get down here to Cebridge Telecom, and you see they bid in Kentucky, Louisiana, and West Virginia, and they won in all of those. So this would be the 18 census blocks groups there. So you see it's 2,266 locations. And you see here it's the Altice USA is the winning bidder, although the applicant name was Cebridge Telecom, Louisiana. So they had an LLC for each one of these locations. And you see LLC quite often. I think it's limited liability corporation. It could be limiting their liability. Obviously, here, if they separate all of these different companies, if there is a problem like this. So you can see you had CenturyLink, Charter. Lots of others winning here. Connexon, they help electric membership co-ops, rural electric utilities with that. Consolidated Communications, Cox, lots of others. And then we get to the performance tier and latency, and here we do see that again, they were one of the few. We've got most of the people doing gigabit. We've got some. Here's AMG doing gigabit, but above baseline in some areas. So they were the 100 by 20 in a couple of areas, but gigabit there. You've got Cable One doing above baseline in one area and gigabit in another. And this is probably DOCSIS plant, where maybe this was capable of doing gigabit, and they were going to do greenfield fiber, and maybe this was over their current cable infrastructure that they were going to upgrade. I don't know what that is. Here's a minimum. How about that? Okay, so Carolina West Wireless doing the minimum. And the minimum, I think that was the 25 by 3, right? Yeah. So then you've got, so this area, 25 by 3, it's still going to be unserved. They go out there and put that RDOF in, money in, it's still going to be unserved. So somebody can get funding there and overbuild them. We've got above baseline here again with Cebridge, Altice, and you got a lot of gigabit. You've got some above baseline here. ComNet, ComNet 4, ComNet Wireless, a lot of gigabit. Above baseline there, Docomo. Here's a baseline, Fiber Light LLC, interesting. So that's a baseline right there. So again, that's in Georgia, and this will be open to BEAD funding. Of course, they didn't know that at the time. BEAD wasn't around, but this will be open to BEAD funding. So I don't know if they're deploying that, and if they do, or if they're going to default. Because if they do deploy it, somebody can get BEAD funding there. Because if they do the baseline, it's only 25 by 3. Now they could certainly change their mind, I suppose, and do gigabit broadband. We've got above baseline here, baseline. So there are a few baselines. I didn't think there were that many, if any, but we do have some of those. And you can see there are other above baselines in here. And then finally, I did link to this. This is the RDOF phase 1. This was the long form applicants winning bids. This is the same auction here where Cebridge won. You can see here, Cebridge Telecom, Kentucky, Louisiana. Now these are, you can see census block groups and eligible census blocks in each group. So there's Louisiana right there. So that's the 18. Yeah, these that you see here, plus these on this page, were the 18 census block groups that they are defaulting on. Oh, and then also there's a tab here with the census block. So you can see, here's Cebridge Telecom again. So there's obviously the census blocks within census block groups. So you can see here's LA here, and as I scroll down, this is all Cebridge Telecom LA. So these are the census blocks that make up these census blocks groups. So you see there's a lot more of those because, again, there's 2,200 plus, I think it was, locations there. Then we get to West Virginia, Cebridge, and here we got cellular services and whatever. So anyway, as I had mentioned, again, the other day, a couple of times, that I think we're going to be seeing more of this because we've got these companies that have bid in the auction, and they are right now looking at their costs. Some of them have been holding off. Some of them putting their money in the bank and trying to get interest while they're figuring all of this out, how they're going to do this. And eventually, hopefully the FCC makes a decision, and they make a decision quick, because these states are now, more of them are getting into the challenge process. And as they get in that challenge process, that's going to be all about which locations are eligible for BEAD funding and which are not, which ones are served or have committed funds and which ones don't. And now here are these over 2,000 locations in Louisiana that are going to go from served because they had committed funding to be at least 100 by 20, not gigabit, but at least 100 by 20, that are going to now be unserved because Altice is pulling out. So there could be more of that, and the sooner we get these figured out, the better. And the stream I did the other day was about the state of Arkansas contacting all of the RDOF winners in the state and saying, hey, you're getting RDOF funds, or you committed to get these areas served through RDOF. Are you really going to do that? Or are you going to default, or are you going to relinquish those areas? We want to know now. So they want to know, so they can do the same thing. They want to get the information early so that they can determine, okay, here's areas that we thought were covered that are not going to be covered. What are we going to do about those? So they're taking, the state of Arkansas is taking a proactive step to contact all the RDOF winners. And here Louisiana is finding out from Altice, who took a proactive step to tell the FCC and the state of Louisiana, hey, we are pulling out here. So more needs to happen here. Some of these RDOF operators or RDOF winners need to step up and do what Altice is doing and saying, hey, we're going to have to pull out here. It'd be better if the FCC could make them feel better about that and say, you know what, we will, if you want to do this for a limited period of time, we will waive any default penalties. We'll give you this period of time to make your intentions clear so that every state knows what they're going to be getting as far as RDOF and what they're not. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. Give me a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't done that. If you do subscribe, click the bell and you'll be notified when I'm live. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.